In this video breakdown series, we're going to talk about kind of a case study with this athlete here that during her basketball season, I asked her how she was feeling on the court, if she, does she feel like she's 100%? She said she's probably about 90%. And I asked why, and she said it was because when she's guarding somebody taking the ball down the court, she can guard their first move, but has difficulty guarding their second move. So as she's really moving hard to her right and has to move back to her left, she doesn't feel like she's able to kind of keep up with them on the second move. So she's having trouble kind of stopping herself and redirecting her momentum off of her right leg to move to her left. So because of that, I knew that we needed to work on her hip turns a little bit more. So this is going to be the progression that I used and some of the drills that I used to help her feel more confident, executing a hip turn with a little bit more mass, or I shouldn't say mass, with a little bit more momentum here in these drills. So the first drill here is her just doing a tier 2 or tier 3, however you want to look at it, hip turn drill. So I had her shuffle first. She's going to shuffle until I point in the opposite direction and have her move. So I'm just looking at her ability to kind of move her feet and find good angles of force application and make sure that she's actually able to rotate her hip and get enough of a hip turn to move in the direction that she needs to go. So for the first drill here, again, with the shuffle, I had her drop back at roughly 45-degree angles, and she does a good job. So shuffling doesn't allow you to go that fast, so there's not a lot of momentum to redirect. So her initial hip turn is good. Foot comes in front of the line that connects her feet. Her foot's perpendicular to the direction that she's trying to travel. She performs that second hip turn, and I would say it's a little bit almost more of a drop step because she's not going that fast. So she doesn't fully get her left hip around as she shuffles out, and kind of the same thing there on her right leg, so you can see how her head kind of pops up as she goes into the shuffle. Better hip turn here on her left leg, so that causes her to be able to push out and not rise so vertically. And then on the last one here, better hip turn off the right. She kind of turns it in a little bit of a lateral run, which I'm okay with. So the first step here, the first progression I used was simply doing a reactive hip turn drill with a shuffle first, and then in the next video, we'll progress it into a lateral run. We progress from a shuffle into a lateral run because a lateral run is going to allow her to have more velocity and cover more distance, which is going to make the cut a little bit more challenging. So this is the exact same drill, lateral running with hip turns on my point as I'm standing in front of her. She does a couple things that I really like in this video, so we'll kind of go through each cut. The initial first hip turn, again, really good shin angle there. Her ankle is dorsiflex. She's attacking the floor and right away is pushing herself out. So we'll watch this first turn at full speed again. Immediately, one fluid motion from the hip turn into the lateral run. As she gets into the lateral run, now she has to cut back to her left. So she kind of stops herself really quick, but then repositions that right foot and gets a really good hip turn. So you can see how she's kind of comes in a little bit high, then changes her level, rotates her hip, and is able to push herself out in the opposite direction. We see her do the same thing on that left foot, kind of gets a little bit high, but then drops her level, abducts her hip, attacks the floor, pushes herself out. And this one I really like there. So she's doing a better job of kind of staying level, but because I only gave her like one step, she really has to get around quicker. And she knows for the angle that she's trying to drop at that she's not in a good position. So instead of drop stepping or kind of opening up her hips, she does a really good job of just taking a small repositioning step with that right foot to push her out to that opposite direction. So again, we progress from a shuffle into a lateral run because the lateral run is going to have more velocity behind it, which means that she's going to have to produce larger impulses to redirect her momentum. The progression from this is going to be in kind of a one-on-one situation with me as the offensive player, where I'm going to be attacking her and she has to be able to kind of keep up with me. So the speed's going to be a little bit different than here in this reactive drill, where I'm simply just pointing and she's flipping her hips. As she is trying to move fast, you can tell her intensity is high, but the intensity is always different when you get another person involved. This is the same day, so we progress from those just kind of reactive pointing hip turn drills into more of a competitive situation. So I'm starting her at a disadvantage, so she has to run forward to try to cut me off as I'm trying to get by her. She's starting probably 1 to 2 steps in front of me because I want to see her be able to flip her hips around and regain balance, and then have to hip turn based upon where I'm cutting. So we'll play full speed first. So she has a couple really good hip turns and then one that I don't love as much. So she does a good job of accelerating, trying to get by me, kind of bending towards my direction, flipping her hips around. Good repositioning step there. So she has to stop off of her right leg as I'm cutting back to her left. She does a good repositioning step there with that right foot, takes a small step, and then I'm cutting back to her right. So then she has to change which foot she's pushing off of. She does a good job of shuffling to her right, pushing off of her left leg. And then right here, so as I'm cutting back to her left, she doesn't hip turn. So she kind of gets a little bit off balance and gets stuck. So her foot doesn't reposition. Just even a small repositioning step like we saw in that second drill. She doesn't do that, which lets me kind of get a little bit of an edge on her. So what I'm looking for with this drill here is, yeah, I may have caught her, but I want her to see her be able to keep her level. So she kind of like ends up pushing up rather than repositioning her foot and pushing herself out. So what I'm looking for again is just that right foot to take a small repositioning step before she has to shuffle or lateral run to again cut me off. So you can see when she kind of gets stuck here and has to go up, her left foot comes behind her. And she does kind of take almost like a, you could consider this a crossover because her legs kind of do cross here. She has to really pull herself across with that left inner thigh to get herself going to her left. So again, I'm looking for much more of a push. So if you're able to reposition that right foot and push here, she'll be able to open her hips up a little bit more and cut me off sooner rather than having her foot kind of get stuck here and having to open up her hips to try to cut me off. So we're going to go over just, kind of practicing these drills because she's able to execute the technique that I'm looking for in an easier situation with a little bit lower velocity, a little bit less momentum to control. So I want to be able to get her to execute this skill in a little bit more of a challenging one-on-one situation to be able to execute a high-level hip turn to keep up with an opponent here. This is the following week. So as we started our session the following week, we're going to work on pretty much the exact same drills. This first one, I'm pointing to having her open and hip turn to the direction that I point to and perform a lateral run, but I'm also giving her kind of a signal to either stop and quickly settle before redirecting her, or I'm having her really quickly flip her hip. So we'll watch this first rep going through. So you can see a couple of those like little quick kind of stops before she performs the hip turn and gets going in the opposite direction. And you'll just kind of see the difference between the first rep and the second rep where I kind of mix it up a little bit more. So you can see a couple, that first turn, a much quicker transition getting into the hip turn. Because I wanted to get her comfortable repositioning her feet. She was almost trying to move from a bad position. So I wanted her on the first reps to stop, feel a brief moment of balance before having to then reposition her feet, reposition that right foot to push herself to her left. And same thing here. She stops, reposition that left foot, attacks and goes out, and repeats. For the second rep, I wanted her to get comfortable transitioning from, moving back to her right and then having to move back to her left. So this very first rep, she does a good hip turn. The left foot comes forward, directional step with the right foot. Nice dissociation between her trunk and her hips. Pushes out, attacks the floor, starts to kind of almost stop, but then I have her keep going. So she does a really aggressive hip turn. If you just kind of see how far her right hip and her right foot travels, because that sets her up to be in a good position. Much better angle of her foot with her knee inside of her foot and her hip in a good position to be able to attack and be aggressive into the floor to push herself back to her left. So she pushes out, gets into that lateral run, then I have her kind of briefly stop and settle, and then perform the hip turn from that angled. So I kind of got her there a little bit. You see it kind of juked her with my hands because of the direction that I pointed. So she does a good job of kind of hip turns the wrong way, but then corrects her mistake and really gets that left foot around aggressively into another really good shin angle to push herself back to her right. And then again, one more time, same thing, just a really small repositioning step is all I'm looking for. Just that foot to get perpendicular to the direction that she needs to travel before finishing this drill. This is the same one-on-one drill that we used the week prior. I'm just having her start in a different position. So she has to perform a hip turn initially rather than performing a lateral run, performing a linear run and then kind of bending to cut me off. So she has to get an aggressive hip turn and really drop aggressively to try to cut me off as we start this drill. You can just see she does a much better job of moving her feet. That's always one of my main cues that I give athletes, is just simply let your feet move. Don't feel like you have to move from a bad position. Always feel and maintain balance as you're just letting your feet move and reacting to whatever stimulus that I'm giving you. So in this case, it just the cuts that I'm performing. So as we go through, good hip turn initially, gets into a nice lateral run to try to cut me off. I try to cut underneath her. So this is going to be a hard cut for her to perform on her right leg. She does a good job of, she kind of gets a little bit taller than I would like, instead of kind of aggressively lowering her center of mass and sticking her foot out. But I'm okay with it because she does a good job of putting her right foot in the ground and not trying to simply move from there. She lets her foot and hip rotate to push herself back to her left. And then again, I cut back because I'm trying to force her to open up again and move to her left. She performs a nice, quick, kind of a double foot jump stop there, but then repositions out of it to push herself in front of me and cut me off again. So she hits with both feet as I'm cutting underneath her. Instead of trying to, again, rip her left hip open and open up from there, she repositions and attacks the floor with that right foot. So you can just see that really quick right foot turn as she pushes. It gets into a lateral run to cut me off. So when you look at how she performs this hip turn compared to the drill prior, her legs get a lot less crossed than they did the week before, where she didn't perform a hip turn at this part. So if she were to try to open up from here, her left foot would go really, really far behind her, and her right foot, her right leg would have to come across and high. So because she performs this small hip turn, she's able to orient her hips towards me and keep that cyclical motion of her legs to get back and cut me off with this drill. So that's what I'm looking for. This is just the progression that I use with this athlete to get her more comfortable, again, handling that kind of second cut. So as I attack her, she has to go aggressive and then really perform a few different cuts, make enough repositioning steps to be able to keep up with her opponent. And we're just getting her into that one-on-one situation where there's a little bit more intensity, there's a little bit higher speed going on, to make sure that she feels comfortable performing this skill like she's going to have to do on the court. The next week, I asked her how she felt, and I kind of asked her, if she felt like she was 100%, and she said she was, even higher, she was above 90. And I asked her specifically, I'm like, do you feel comfortable? How is that kind of handling somebody's second move? And she said that felt, so much better after we had practiced it here. And I'm not saying I made her a better basketball player by any means, but by understanding the movements that she would need to be able to perform, and in the situations that she would need to be able to perform those skills and movement patterns in, allowed me just to create some really simple drills to get her to be able to execute them at a high level, to get her comfortable performing this thing specifically that she doesn't feel comfortable with, and that was performing that really aggressive hip turn going to her left. So getting that right hip to come around to attack the floor and push out.